Welcome to another episode of Conduct Detrimental. Dan Luss, Taryn Sharma, back again. Taryn, talking on a Wednesday. How's your week been so far?
Yeah, it's good. Busy. It's a busy time of the year for deal lawyers, but I'm always glad when I can take a few minutes and talk to my favorite Dan.
Ooh, don't say that. That could be fighting words. So, Taryn, you and I were talking offline. The legal practice, you passed the bar. Are you admitted yet?
Yeah, admitted in October.
Wow. I think it's your second time on the podcast that you've been admitted. I rudely didn't ask you the first time. This is the fun side of the law, right? A lot of the legal practice, we can be transparent. It's not so much fun. Billable hours are not fun. Getting into fights on the phone, sometimes those could be fun. I had one that wasn't necessarily so fun today. But yeah, responding to subpoenas, doing discovery requests, that necessarily part for the litigation side is not fun. There's stuff I do on the deal side, not fun. But Taryn, you know what's fun?
What's that?
Doing a sports law podcast and talking sports law to our audience each and every week. So what we've laid out 5 topics today. We're essentially going to do, we're going to talk a little bit about Dan Snyder. I know we had promised an episode covering exclusively Dan Snyder. Dan Wallach, listen, sometimes duty calls. That's why you have 2 Dans. Sometimes Dan A is not here and you bring in Dan B, a.k.a. Dan L, and I can steer the ship when Dan Wallach is not around. We are eventually going to have that episode. We're going to bring on a big guest, a surprise mystery guest who will not be revealed, but we're going to talk a little bit about the updates in the Snyder saga as of today, a little bit on the GOP report, a little bit about some of the former female employees speaking out in response to the reports that came out last week. But again, obviously, our podcast is called Conduct Detrimental. We have to cover the Conduct Detrimental report, like, duh. And then read some big stories in college sports. Passing of Mike Leach, we're talking about an interesting lawsuit that he's involved in as a proxy for many years against Texas Tech. Talk about the Arizona allegations, which is now the Arizona findings that are out today, dating back many years to Coach Miller and a big basketball investigative report. We get into that. Chris Beard, not Beard from Coach Lasso, but like Chris Beard, real beard. How is Chris Beard's beard? Not great, not as good as your and my beards as we sit here on the Zoom.
That's right. We've got better scruff, I think.
So we're going to talk about Chris Beard, jokes aside, some pretty heinous allegations. We're going to talk about what exactly entails, what's going on with Texas University. Not every day that a Division I coach get accused of strangulation, some really kind of ugly assault charges. Some listeners might be like, didn't that just happen to Mickey Joseph over in Nebraska? He was no longer the coach at that point in time. So Chris Beard is an active coach who's now suspended for an assault allegation. Last but not least, more on a positive note, we had a breakthrough on the NIL space, a first in the NIL world, the first time NIL deal. Yes, we are about a year and a half into the NIL era, and we did just hit a first. It is a big one. Okay, but a little bit of a spoiler. Taryn, you are the closest thing to a Washington Commanders fan on our podcast. You and I have not spoke online or offline about this report, but I know you have some heavy thoughts in it. Your takeaways from the 79-page report, the bombshell about the Gruden stuff, take it away. You have the floor.
Yeah, I mean, how about you being quoted on Pat McAfee's show? I'm a big fan of Pat McAfee, and so that was really cool to hear him and AJ Hawk talk about something that you tweeted out, and it was a bombshell. I think that the congressional finding that the leak of the Gruden emails, which we had thought was a smokescreen at the time, was in fact coming from the Washington franchise side. So I think that whenever you can have a kind of conspiracy that people who really dislike Dan Snyder have been thinking confirmed by a congressional body, that's the best. And so it was really nice, I think, for that to be revealed and to be kind of backed up by a higher order. I think beyond that, right, it was a lot of the things that we kind of already knew, the way that Snyder had over the span of the last couple of decades created the type of environment that was completely inappropriate for any workplace, let alone one that is a multi-billion-dollar representation of the most powerful part of the country. And so I was glad that these things were revealed, and I'm hoping that, the next thing is the sale. We're 40 days removed from the initial retainer of Bank of America to conduct a sale in whole or in part of the Commanders franchise. And so I'm very hopeful that we're going to get a full sale by Snyder of the team to somebody who, isn't going to stand for the type of environment that Snyder created. But, these sales don't happen overnight, and it's still not entirely clear whether it's going to be a sale in full. Obviously, all Commanders fans, I think, are hopeful that it's going to be a full sale, because then they won't have to deal with Dan at all anymore. Worst Dan, the Dan who must not be named. So I'm holding my breath on that one, and I'm very hopeful. Some other news that came out just this week after the release of the report last week was Lisa Banks and Deborah Katz, two attorneys who are representing more than 36 former Commanders employees and who have been on this show. Isn't that right?
They haven't been on the show, but some former employees, some of their clientele have been on the show.
Sure. And they wrote a strongly worded letter to the
I should say with the attorney's permission, though. We always got to button up things here, but the attorneys are approved of those appearances as far as I was aware, but go ahead.
And one of the most salacious, disgusting, repulsive things that Snyder has been accused and really most likely did over the span of that the report covers is cutting together video and pictures of cheerleaders changing, and he called it the good bits, which is like just a disgusting way to refer to anyone, but especially your employees. And some of those photos were included in congressional records that the House Republican members of the Oversight and Reform Committee, which was in response to the conduct detrimental report that the majority had released. And so they asked that those photos be removed from congressional records. And I think that that's a pretty fair ask.
Fair ask. I guess we should pause here for a second, right? Just for those that did not follow that closely. Congress releases a 79-page report, and you might be asking, why is the GOP releasing a 210-page report? You know, again, show is not political, just stating some facts. At the time that the House Oversight Committee was conducting its investigation, it was by and large controlled by the left, by the Democrats. So if you remember those hearings with Roger, I think one of the senators called him like Roger Goodell. They were like clearly not informed on who Raj was. But, you know, anytime a Republican spoke up, the comment was along the lines of, isn't this a waste of judicial resources? Why are we talking about the investigation into a football team? We have more important things. And again, the show is not political, but like, you know, probably what Congress probably does have better things to do than look into Dan Snyder. And are they looking into Dan Snyder because his team happens to be in the backyard of Washington, D.C.? Like, probably. But that said, as we're sitting here, like, I think, I mean, if you're listening to this podcast right now, right, you're probably either a lawyer or a sports fan. And I think we spoke about this a little bit last week when I was on with Justin, but like, Congress was able to find things that no one else either was able to find, uncover, or did not release to the public. John Gruden stuff is fairly, I mean, maybe some people assume that leak came from the Washington Commanders organization, but like certainly wasn't out in the public. It certainly wasn't out in the public an allegation that Lisa Friel, the NFL's lawyer, released that or told that to Bruce Allen. So, you know, whether we want to say, right, Congress shouldn't be sticking their nose in the NFL's business and what Washington's doing, they did find something that's helpful for our causes, right? And if you're John Gruden's lawyer, you're certainly thankful that Congress took up the cause today because they were able to get some testimony that obviously would not have otherwise occurred in the Gruden case. But anyway, why I wanted to say one thing, Taryn, you mentioned something very interesting. GOP, who during the House Oversight Committee's investigation, anytime they've had any type of public comments, they've said this is a waste of time. So Congress puts out a 79-page report. The GOP puts out a 210-page report to tell you how much of a waste of time the 79-page report was. So that seemed a little odd. Like, if this is so unimportant, why did you just spend 3 times the amount of effort writing your report? And then on top of it, right, like the 79-page report, people can go through it. Like, obviously, and I should mention, thank you for the shout out to Pat McAfee. I've watched that clip too many times. He's kind of doing like the NFL red zone voice. Did you catch that? Who's the guy that does the red zone? Is it Scott Hansen is the guy?
Yeah.
Pat McAfee, maybe, God bless us, maybe someday we'll find a way to make reading the House Oversight Committee as interesting as Pat McAfee made it sound.
He could narrate paint drying, and I think it would be interesting.
Yeah, I was impressed. But Pat said that Congress found that Washington leaked the Gruden emails. That's not what Congress said. Congress said that Bruce Allen said that the NFL blamed Washington. So it's like hearsay within hearsay within hearsay, right? Like, it's not really hearsay because at least Bruce Allen was under oath, but like, it's a level within hearsay. It's like, I heard someone else say it. So would that statement ever be admissible in a court of law? Like, probably not. Like, not for the truth of the matter asserted, right? Bruce Allen can't commit that the NFL, at least if real, actively said something. Taryn, pop quiz. Who would they need to admit that statement for the truth of the matter asserted? Who would they need? The NFL has to say that. You can't. This is like we had a conversation. I'm getting in the weeds for a second, but in the Brian Flores saga, we had this thing. It was like, could Bill Belichick get the Giants in legal trouble by his comments? So people that are following this, hopefully you're nerds and you're following this, but like there was that whole allegation that Bill Belichick texted Brian Flores, "Hey, Brian, congrats on getting the Giants job." And that text was actually meant, allegedly, for Brian Daboll. So the question is like, this is like, if you were a non-lawyer, and a lot of journalists were tweeting this, like, Bill Belichick just cost the Giants are going to get sued because of Bill Belichick. I'm like, congratulations. Bill Belichick cannot bind the Giants organization by something he says, because last I checked, he's not an officer of the Giants, right? He's not a CEO. He's not the GC. He's not the GM. He's not even the coach. He doesn't work for the Giants. So you can't bind someone to the truth of something if you don't work for the team. So Bruce Allen, right? We're preempting a little bit of things, but Bruce Allen doesn't work for the NFL, right? Bruce Allen, at the time he made that statement, didn't even work for Washington. So Bruce Allen is like, oh, I called up the NFL and the NFL told me that Washington released the emails. So hearsay within hearsay, that's not going to be admissible. Obviously, we're not really dealing with a real court case. But like, more importantly, Bruce Allen, right? Again, I'm not defending Dan Snyder. But what's Dan Snyder going to say if he was on this podcast right now? He'd be like, Bruce Allen and I do not get along, right? It's a self-serving statement. Bruce Allen is a former employee who has an axe to grind. Like, why wouldn't he blame us? Why wouldn't he make us look bad? So yes, it's a big allegation. It's still an allegation, but not to get so off course here, but like the GOP report, among a number of things, did they do a good job like quieting the noise? No, they put in these like salacious photos of the cheerleaders. Like, guys, if you were trying to do a good job of like moving, like, hey, let's move on, there's nothing to see here. We're doing a report that's 3 times as large with inappropriate photos that I don't know what the benefit of that was.
Yeah. As far as the Allen allegations go, yeah, I don't think that obviously that's going to get them in any sort of legal trouble. I do think, though, that Congress and the House Oversight Committee put that in there knowing that they kind of supported that theory. And so I still think that it was a good thing for people who believe that that was the case to see something like that reflected in an official record. And as far as, what Snyder would say if he was on here, yeah, you're absolutely right. He would say that he and Bruce Allen had a falling out, despite the fact that they worked together for almost 20 years to create the damn good culture, so-called, that is now threatening to bring down Snyder. And I think that the House Republican report also reflects that line of thinking. It's almost become political in the sense that you have the people who are aligning with Snyder and think that he believes that what he's saying is correct and that he wasn't totally at fault, because Snyder would love to distance himself from the culture that he created as much as possible. And then you have the House Democrats who are very zealously going after Snyder in particular because of all of the reasons that you've mentioned previously, the location and who was suffering as a result of this workplace culture. So yeah, obviously very interesting. And we're going to continue to hear about this because Snyder still owns the team as of today, and he'll probably own it for another year or so. And so we'll see what happens, but hopefully any day now he'll be gone.
Yeah, just as we put a pin in this, I was going back, I listened to our old episode with ESPN's investigative team on this case. They had done a lot of research. I will say one thing, like, I remember we said it on the podcast, and I just listened to confirm. I'm like, well, at the time, Robert Sarver put out a statement saying that the ESPN report into the Phoenix Suns was incorrect. And then like the NBA confirmed it. And then, right, Dan Snyder has this ESPN report. Dan Snyder puts it out and says, this thing is not true. This is wrong. And I'm like, at some point, the NFL is going to put out a report, and I'm pretty sure it's going to confirm it. What we had in the interim, just so people are paying attention here, right? This is kind of like the expert class. You know who confirmed it? Congress confirmed it. Could you tell me that people have an axe to grind? Sure, but like this 79 pages, don't worry about the 210 pages for now. It said that Dan Snyder was running personal interference and was hiring private investigators to look into Bruce Allen.
Under oath, he was saying that.
Right. It's not like ESPN is inventing this. ESPN would not put their journalistic reputation on the line to like make something up. I would hope that ESPN now, and it's like decades of coverage, wouldn't do that. And they've been borne out to be correct, I don't know, twice. They're 2 for 2 in the last year. So on very big cases.
Yeah, I'm not going to go that far as to like a blanket ESPN statement, but the specific people, Seth Wickersham and those people, like they are the best of the best, and they have proven themselves to be well sourced. And so they were right again. Yeah.
Now, Karen, sometimes it's fun to talk about movies. I was listening to a podcast that was talking about like top media movies, and then they both recommended this movie called Shattered Glass. Never heard of it before. Story about this guy named Stephen Glass. Stephen Glass was an editor and a reporter, journalist for this newspaper called the New Republic magazine. The movie's not that good, but the story's very interesting. So I would advise you just to go on Wikipedia and look it up. But this guy is a writer for a pretty well-known magazine. So we talk about ESPN, like we talked about on our previous episode, the amount of fact checking that has to be done for a story to get out. Because every story, theory is like a bet the company story. If you're really going to say like, this story is ready to go, we've sourced it, we've resourced it, right? The allegation in that like Doug Gottlieb, Casey Close, Freddie Freeman saga was that maybe Doug Gottlieb didn't source that story. So for a big allegation to get out, like that Dan Snyder is hiring private investigators to intimidate witnesses, for that to get out under ESPN's banner has to be double, triple, quadruple, quintuple fact checked to get out. And they feel pretty confident that gets out. There's a movie, again, Shattered Glass. I guess this is our pseudo what to watch for. Taryn, I'll take yours later at the end. But like, this is a story about a journalist at a very high level publication that literally made up, I think the number was 27 out of 41 stories. He just made them up, and then nobody caught it. And then the only reason I brought it up here, this guy ends up getting fired from his job, obviously. He tries to be a lawyer. So Taryn, we're talking about passing the bar. Some of you listening to this are going to be some college students. I imagine, obviously, some senior lawyers listen to this, but some law students. Passing the bar is step one. Taryn, you know what else you have to do? You have to pass the ethics portion. You have to pass the MPRE, and you also have to pass the character and fitness portion. You have to pass like the written ethics test. But let's say for a period of 3 years of your life, you were fabricating stories and making things up and basically committing fraud in the newspaper you're working for. Taryn, do you think this person was certified to practice as an attorney?
No, because you have to disclose that.
He disclosed it, but they said California State Bar is like, no, you cannot be a lawyer. You are not fit for the profession. So as you and I are sitting here sometimes griping about our profession, just know that it's a privilege, right? It's not, we don't have a right to be lawyers. It's a privilege to be a lawyer. But yeah, as people want to Google it, it's a fun case. He took it to the California State Bar. He appealed it to the highest court in California, and he was rejected. So Stephen Glass, you can look that up. A reminder, as we're talking about getting admitted to the bar, Themis Bar Review will help you get over one leg to becoming a lawyer. That is passing the bar exam. They're not going to help you pass character and fitness. Hopefully you don't have any bad ethics things in your background.
But they can help you pass the MPRE.
Taryn, they can do the MPRE too?
I took the MPRE prep course with Themis.
They're just doing it all. They could do everything except help prevent you from making up 41 fabricated stories and then never being able to be a lawyer ever again. Okay, we'll put Snyder in the books. Obviously, we'll keep tabs on it. Second portion of the podcast, we want to cover really exclusively college sports stories. A reminder, there are college sports segments sponsored by the law firm of Orr and Horgan, our friends over in Nebraska. I speak to those guys pretty regularly. They do work with the college sports scene down there. College sports scene is getting pretty hazy with a couple different characters. You have alumni, you have collaboratives, you have collectives, and Tom Horgan and Connor Orr have been very helpful in a number of channels. So those guys are very good. Taryn, you and I like to facet ourselves as being NIL lawyers, but we are a network of NIL lawyers across the country. So if you're in Taryn's neck of the woods, my neck of the woods, or you're in Nebraska, we can hook you up. So whether it's me, Taryn, reach out to us. We usually can refer you to the right person. Taryn, that's it. 4 topics on our college sports deck. We have Mike Leach. We have Arizona and Coach Miller. We have Coach Beard and this new NIL breakthrough deal. Taryn, I had you on this podcast for a reason. You are very well versed in all things college. We had a big passing. We actually had 2 big passings in the sports world this past week. One, we're not going to talk about this episode. I imagine we'll talk about it when the World Cup is over, but that was Grant Wall, the former Sports Illustrated soccer reporter. He used to be the basketball reporter, but an untimely, really tragic demise over in Qatar. We're going to talk about that, I think, at a later point in time. The one that we're going to focus on this episode, we're doing a college sports episode, is Mike Leach. So Taryn, I'm going to give you the floor, and obviously there's some legal components to this as well.
Yeah, I've been a big fan of Mike Leach's for a long time. I just thought he was such a unique character and really a one-of-one type of person in a world where, coaches are encouraged to give coach speak, and it can often be exhausting to just listen to, we've got to execute better than the other team, blah, 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 blah. Same stuff that you've heard a million times in a million press conferences. To hear a guy talk about his favorite Halloween candies, which mascot would win in a fight.
And least favorite candies.
Yeah, and go into great detail about everything. The guy who wrote a book about Geronimo while he was coaching, a lawyer like us, a graduate of Pepperdine Law School, and really just a great football coach, an innovator, went to a lot of places, that had not had a history of winning and won almost 60% of his games over the span of his career, sprouted an amazing coaching tree that would be the envy of a lot of coaches and really changed the game of football with his air raid system. And so a tremendous loss, and he went out a winner. And just a couple of quick stories about him. So Jeremy Schaap had him on E60 3 or 4 years ago. And he basically asked him this question: when people write the Mike Leach obituary, how do you want to be remembered? And Mike Leach said, well, that's their problem. What do I care? I'm dead. And so I think that it was just perfect to hear that, especially in the wake of his passing, which obviously is so tragic, being gone at 61 from complications related to a heart attack. That's far too young. The second story, which I thought was really great, you were talking about Nebraska and Blake Lawrence, who is the founder of Open Doors.
Big NIL company.
Huge. And he played football in Nebraska. He said that he went on a recruiting visit to Texas Tech. He walks into Mike Leach's office, and it's kind of quirky. There's just a desk there where Leach is sitting, and then there's a bicycle hanging from the ceiling. And he sits down and he asks Coach Leach, do you ride your bicycle a lot? And Mike Leach looks up at the bike. He's like, huh? Oh, no, I just think it's cool. But then he pulls out a deck of cards and he's like, all right, Blake, do you want to do some magic? And Blake Lawrence like, what? And so he's like, there's going to be two piles, a red pile and a black pile. And you tell me to put it either in the red pile or the black pile. And if you're right, then you have to commit to Texas Tech. Blake Lawrence is like, all right, man, like whatever. First card, red, black, red, 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 black, black, red, randomly. Then when all 52 cards are out, Leach says to him, all right, Blake, well, if you're right, then all the cards in the red pile should be red and all the cards in the black pile should be black. And so he's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Flips them over. And sure enough, all the cards in the red pile are red and all the cards in the black pile are black. He didn't end up committing to Texas Tech, but he told that story, and he has no idea how Leach did it. And I'm obviously have no idea as well, but just such an interesting guy, and he'll be missed. So swing your sword forever.
Well, I was going to say, before you move on,
Karen,
do we think that's a binding offer and an acceptance?
Yeah, well, if anyone would know contracts, it would be Mike Leach.
Well, no, because he never practiced law. We would know that, Taryn.
Well, I mean, more
you have
so
practiced more law than Mike Leach has.
Sure, but I mean it more in the sense that he was in a ongoing contract dispute with Texas Tech for more than a decade.
Hold there. Okay, so I wanted to make sure we talked about Mike Leach a little bit. If you want more, ESPN Daily put out a wonderful podcast on him. Again, two-time Coach of the Year, 2008 with Texas Tech, 2018 or 2019 with Washington State. Really highly decorated guy. I don't know, probably the only guy that's went to law school that's a Power 5 coach. It's an interesting guy, and obviously you could trace Tim Couch and Ty Detmer and even Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams. They're all in the Mike Leach coaching tree. It's very interesting, but story for another time. Karen, the story why I wanted to bring Leach up, we could talk about people that leave tremendous legacies and whatnot, but there is an interesting legal dispute and an interesting topic that we've never really found a way to cover on our show. Mike Leach in 2009, so he wins Coach of the Year in 2008. By 2010, he's no longer at Texas Tech. So how does that happen? How do you win Coach of the Year and you get fired? Well, Taryn asked Coach O. He won the national championship, and then he was no longer at LSU within 2 years. Stranger things have happened. Coach Leach was fired for something very odd. There was a player that was alleged to have maybe suffered a concussion. The medical staff said it's probably safe to keep this guy out of practice. The reports, and again, I know we were just saying that ESPN was really good on the Snyder reporting, but two stories we're about to get into where some people say that ESPN maybe messed up certain things. But listen, we read our replies. We see where things happen. So Mike Leach at the time was very angry at ESPN. There was a story again. Mike Leach said to the student, hey, if you're not practicing, I want you to go stand and watch practice from the equipment shed. Now, according to some reports, the equipment shed was kind of like a shed, not an equipment room, a shed, a small shed. The player involved, I guess, had some, big connections, and the university said to Leach, listen, just apologize to the family for doing this. And Leach, I'm just reading the reporting here, Leach refused to apologize. Kind of back and forth. Again, we don't know exactly what happened, but that's the gist of the underlying dispute.
Yeah, big connections for sure. It was Adam James and his father, Craig James, played at SMU, big time ESPN personality at the time, and then later ran for Senate or governor in Texas. So, like, it's a powerful family.
Important. Yeah, no, that's totally fair. Either way, someone very well connected. The allegations, concussions, right? Someone being in shed. Maybe that part's not right. If you do something wrong, not a one strike rule, apologize. And then, he ended up being let go from Texas Tech, but he was let go. They said he was insubordination, and the insubordination was refusing to make that apology. Leach felt, and still to his last day, felt that he was owed $2.5 million from Texas Tech. Leach sued Texas Tech for that money, and the case ends up being dismissed under very complicated, we're not going to talk about here, Texas's sovereign immunity laws. That's 2009. Maybe normal people would forget about it. They'd move on. Not Mike Leach. Taran, you and I did some digging, and I think Sportico had this report. But in 2017, Leach was still upset. He ends up hiring this guy. What's the guy's name? Delfino? He hires a guy who is kind of like an investigative journalist turned lawyer. And it's kind of like unclear what the guy was trying to do, but the lawsuit's dismissed. The wrongful termination lawsuit's dismissed. You can't really get directly at Texas Tech through a normal wrongful termination case. What I gather from reading some of the reports with respect to this case and comments from this guy Delfino himself is that Leach hired Delfino to conduct like a records request into Texas Tech, almost like FOIL request, trying to get to the truth of the matter and get back Leach's reputation, because the emails and how Leach was fired and the internal conversations, they wanted to get that information. So sometimes you can get it through discovery, right? Normal depositions, documents and whatnot, almost subpoenas. Other times when you're dealing with a public institution like a Texas Tech, you can get it directly from the university. So from Taran, what you and I could best gather, the last 5 years, Mike Leach has retained this guy Delfino to basically just attack Texas Tech from all different means. Records requests, intervening in other lawsuits, get Texas requests, helping do depositions of different characters associated with the organization. But for 6 years, just a grudge that Leach still has against Texas Tech, which ESPN reported on, that he still feels that way about Texas Tech, still feels this way about this incident. Came out today that Leach has spent over $300,000 to fund these separate public records requests. And now, at least as of today, Leach was still spending upwards of $20,000 to $30,000 a month to fund these private records requests and independent discovery into this organization. So why we bring it up today? We have the main money man with respect to these lawsuits now no longer with us. It's tragic passing. But the question is, what happens to these cases? So, Taran, I know we did some fun digging into this, but I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Does this just go away now that we lost the money, we lost the funding?
In an ordinary world, right? Like if a plaintiff passed away, then that would be the end of the case. But in this instance, because it's a proxy plaintiff, this guy Delfino, Sharon Leach, who presumably is going to be the executor of the estate here for Mike Leach, it's up to her whether she wants to continue the fight. I think the way that it was phrased, Delfino was saying that maybe he was a little bit sensitive as to how much the costs were running up, that maybe it won't continue. But I think that more than the money, what mattered to Mike Leach was about his reputation. I think he prided himself on being a good person. And so when he was kind of framed as being this typical football coach, doesn't care about head injuries and all of that stuff, I think that hurt him. And yeah, he tried valiantly everything he could to keep this going. And now that he's gone, I wonder if family will let it lie or if they'll continue to fight for whatever honor that Leach felt was stolen from him.
I think the Leach stuff is very interesting. There's also one, Taran, about you referenced it, like swinging the sword to motivate the players. He's like, if you're a pirate, like if you have a sword, do you want a dull sword? Everyone knows you're not going to swing it. Do you want a clean, pristine, sharp sword? And you want to swing that sword. You want to know that you will be the first to strike. I'm imagining like that's how he motivated this Texas Tech back in the day in a program that exceeded expectations. Same thing with Washington State. Mississippi State will say the last game that Leach coached was a very big win in the Egg Bowl, right? Over Ole Miss.
Yep.
But now I'm imagining, and maybe we should adopt this for our respective law firms. If you really want to motivate someone to do a good job at a deposition or a trial, just take a sword, right? And just start swinging it around. Strike first, strike often, no mercy. Just swing a sword. That might be like a little hazardous in the workplace to have a sword, but like apparently Mike Leach had one at these various schools, so it must be allowed under some state. I think it's like OSHA laws, right? It must be allowed there.
I think it would probably be better for the litigation approach where you're going into battle than maybe doing deals like what I do. But yeah, I love it. I think everyone should have at least a plastic sword in their arsenal. Okay,
so moving on from Leach, let's go over to Sean Miller and Arizona. Just really quick. people were kind of paying attention to this. Sean Miller, one-time coach at Arizona. He's now the current coach at Xavier. So big investigation into 3 years ago. Sean Miller's name came up. Will Wade came up. Bill Self came up. Big coaches at various universities, whether or not they were going to get in trouble. This was all pre-NIL era. So these investigations have been going on for like, Taryn, 3-4 years, right around there. We have some schools self-imposing bans, but we have this big news today in like kind of the middle of nowhere, a year and a half into the NIL era, that there will be 0 sanctions for Sean Miller. Taryn, I'm going to give it to you. And obviously that's an indication that probably Bill Self gets off as well. Bill Self, obviously big-time coach at Kansas. Let me ask you my main question without getting into all the details. How does it possibly take that long? How is that possible? It took 4 years to get to that conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, that's the NCAA at work, right? Like they put the independent accountability resolution process in place, I think, in part to be a little bit more efficient with this and to have a little bit more of a hands-off approach to policing these sorts of compliance issues. But yeah, the truth is that there's nothing very efficient about the NCAA. So yeah, Sean Miller, no real consequences. But on the other hand, his assistants, Booker Richardson, most notably, both went to prison and now got hit with a 10-year show cause penalty today. And that's over a $40,000 payment for a falsified academic transcript that was to get a player eligible. I don't know. I guess that IARP found that to be that he was the only one responsible, that he went rogue and that it was completely his fault. On the other hand, because Arizona has accepted this previous postseason ban that they self-imposed in Sean Miller's last season, they're going to get a minor penalty. They're going to lose one scholarship for next season, and then they won't be able to communicate with recruits for a 7-week period during this season. So in addition to those things, a $5,000 fine, and they're going to vacate the 2016 and 17 seasons. Yeah, I don't know. Do you think that that's like commensurate? Should the NCAA even be handing down these types of punishments at this point?
Well, yes and no. I mean, like this was their jurisdiction pre-NIL era, maybe moving forward. Like, I don't know, like this wasn't just paying athletes. This was academic related misconduct. So, well, I mean, maybe we've done a deep dive, I think about a year ago, right around March Madness in 2020. If people want to go through our archives, we covered this at length, the college basketball corruption case, which was supposed to be this big thing. And then like moving forward, July 1st, 2021 onward, it's like, how these athletes are getting paid. So do we care as much about $100,000 payment for DeAndre Ayton to go to University of Arizona? Like, not really, but like, I don't know. Like, I get that we should decriminalize marijuana offenses, but it doesn't like mean at the time that it was okay. And I'm sure there are certain coaches, no one's going to raise their hand and make us think about it now during the NIL era, but if rules were there and certain schools were not breaking the rules and others were, right? Like maybe you should be punished for previous conduct. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's that controversial, but I don't know. I don't really have that much thoughts. And I just found it interesting that it took 4 years. And obviously the longer they waited into the NIL era, the less likely they were to come up with some heavy punishment against Miller, someone that wields a little bit more, speaking of swords, like he swings a little bit bigger of a sword at a program like Xavier.
Yeah. And I took a look. Pat 40 has an article out today that talks about why the assistants were the ones that got punished instead of Sean Miller or any of the head coaches. But the most interesting thing is that there's going to be strict liability here going forward, where if a program gets in trouble, then the head coach is the one that's on the chopping block. And so that should be, I think, a more effective deterrent that would prevent this sort of outcome in the future.
Okay, so let's stick with other college basketball coaches. Coach Chris Beard over at Texas. I'll let this one fairly quick. It's obviously story still ongoing, and I want to caution people, this is not a case like Sean Miller where the NCAA and the IARP have looked into this for years and years and years and came up with their findings. This is a story that remains ongoing. So Chris Beard is currently suspended as head coach of the University of Texas. It's an alleged, I don't know exactly what we want to call it. It's a form of assault that's being alleged here. Chris Beard denies it. He claims that he has recordings to show that this is not exactly as it was alleged to have been. He's not releasing, at least as of today, as we're recording this, I understand that he's not released those recordings to police. So we're left kind of with this ugly situation. So, Taryn, what's the latest on Chris Beard? It's a story that we got tagged in a lot of stories. I want to make sure we cover it. I want to make sure our listeners are obviously informed, even though the story remains ongoing.
Yeah, Beard, who was lured over from Texas Tech, where he had a great deal of success with the Red Raiders and took them to the national championship. And they were in overtime against UVA here in Minneapolis, actually, in 2019. He was lured to the University of Texas with a big contract. And this week he was arrested in an alleged assault of his fiance, who he's been with for 6 years and supposedly was choking after a heated argument during which their glasses were broken. And so the University of Texas has suspended him until further notice, but this third degree felony charge of assault, it carries with it some significant penalties. So Beard is out on $10,000 bond right now, but for me, it's hard to imagine a situation in which even if he were to plead this out or settle this, how could Texas take him back?
Listen, like, let's call like it is. Like, it's innocent until proven guilty, right? That doesn't mean that a school can, in their own private discretion, make a decision like, hey, we're going to move on, right? There's just too much issues with this. Someone could say, right, this is wrongful termination. Now, I should caution, right? Like, wrongful termination, and you and I on the deal side, like, I do some litigation work, we do deal side work. What a for-cause firing, a lot depends on how the contract is written, right? If it's not written into the contract, it's kind of open for interpretation. But like, you'd imagine a school like Texas, if they're paying big money to lure a coach like that over, they're going to have that very locked in as to what qualifies as for cause. And if this guy Beard wants his money, right, he's obviously going to hire attorneys and agents to negotiate it down. But we'll see. I mean, I haven't had a chance to review Chris Beard's contract. I imagine something like that is not something that you and I could just readily pull off of Google, absent some type of records request. But yeah, I mean, could someone being accused of a charge like this, like a moral type crime, even the charge, could that, and being arrested? Yeah. I mean, even if you end up being exonerated, that certainly could, under some circumstances, amount to wrong, a proper firing, not something that could result in wrongful termination. So, even like Mickey Joseph, the guy at Nebraska, just kind of coincidental, was accused of strangulation. It was, not a story we'll get into today, but people were like, how is it possible that they can let him go when he's still under investigation? I'm like, it depends what's in the contract. We can't assume that, like I would imagine if you're accused of strangling, like, let's say, Taryn, somebody gave me this crazy example on Twitter. Like, Taryn, let's say you're accused of murdering somebody and you're the head coach of, like, Minnesota, the Golden Gophers. You're not allowed to be fired. So no one can replace Taryn as the head coach of the Golden Gophers until his trial is done 4 years now. It's not possible. You can't do that. No, that would never happen. Like, it just wouldn't. So yeah, and obviously being accused of certain acts like murder, if a DA's office finds it to be that sufficient, that could be a triggering cause event to be terminated, of course.
Yeah, and there are different ways that these clauses can be framed. Some can say that you actually have to be charged, in which case still charged. Some can say that you have to be convicted of them. In this case, there hasn't been any sort of conviction yet. And in this instance, the University of Texas has a standard clause in their contract. So the clause for Chris Beard's contract, and this was tweeted out by @_Danny Davis on Twitter, any conduct that the university administration reasonably determines is clearly unbecoming to a head coach and reflects poorly on the university, the program, or the University of Texas system, or B, results in a criminal charge being brought against the head coach involving a felony, ding, 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 or a crime involving theft, dishonesty, or moral turpitude.
Look at you. Look at that research. I didn't see that tweet. That was great research.
Yeah, so I think you have both A and B satisfied here. So the University of Texas could part with him. Now, you bring up Mickey Joseph. I think that's a really interesting example because it's two very different situations, right? Like, Mickey Joseph came in. He is a beloved former player, but he is a interim head coach that they probably weren't going to keep, and they definitely weren't going to keep after they had Matt Rule. And so in this case, Chris Beard is a guy that they lured away from their in-state rival, took a bunch of flack from people for taking a in-conference coach and paid him a bunch of money. They just opened this new arena. They're a top 5 team in the country. And then this happens. I think my feeling is that they will do more and try to see a way that they could keep him in a way that maybe the University of Nebraska is not going to bend over backwards to keep Mickey Joseph.
I agree. So listen, we'll see where that one goes, but another interesting one. Taryn, let's finish with this. We'll keep this one pretty tight. We did a little bit of a greeny tease that there was a high school, an NIL breakthrough deal that has not happened yet. Taryn, you are our resident NIL professor. High school NIL obviously has been around for a while. What do we have? We have a first, correct?
Yeah, this is awesome. So California high school senior named Bella Rasmussen, who plays tackle football at Laguna Beach High School. She is the first girl to sign a name, image, and likeness deal as a football player, which is really exciting. And so she signed a deal with KeyWise, which is an app that's focused on tracking people's mental health with various objective metrics. And so I think that, one, it's very cool that she is playing a unique sport and she's been able to capitalize on her name, image, and likeness as a result of it. But I think also this is clearly a testament to how a lot of these players are viewing the NIL space, because for her, she didn't want to just sign with any company because she was inundated with offers, but she wanted to sign with something that was really important to her. And to her, she said that mental health is very important, not just as a girl playing on a football team with all guys, but just as an athlete and as a person. So I thought that was really cool and a fun bit of great news within the NIL space.
Congrats to her. As a father of two little girls, that is fantastic. I love to see it. My wife would definitely not let my little girls play football. It's not going to happen, but good for other girls. Okay, Taryn, let's do this really quick. I did my what to watch for. Taryn, do you have a what to watch for?
Yeah, I've been really into this World Cup. It's been awesome. I like soccer generally, but this World Cup has been really fun. A lot of dramatic games, especially that quarterfinal round. And so we've got the final set as of today. So it'll be Messi versus Mbappe. And it's going to be very interesting no matter what happens. Argentina going for their first World Cup since 1986. Messi looking to solidify himself as the greatest player of all time in that debate against Ronaldo. Mbappe and France, they're going for a repeat. No team has repeated since 1962. And either way, we're going to end up with something fascinating. And one of those two countries is going to come away with their third World Cup title. So I'm looking forward to that Sunday morning.
Taryn, if Argentina wins it all, I will win my firm's Mordhock and Hamroff. I will win my firm's World Cup pool if Argentina wins. So let's go Argentina. Let's go Argentina. Taryn, excellent job. Before we get out, we will, as we do each and every week, we'll hit it over to Colin for our Better Edge segment. Great job, Taryn. And appreciate it, buddy.
Always, Dan.
So, Colin, I said it last week. I said you were kind of fun to root against, and I was all of a sudden rooting for you. And now look what happens. I root for you, and you lose. You lose, Colin.
Yeah, I don't really get why you had to speak that into existence. You just had to be. You had to be like one of those annoying kids, on the playground when you're little, just poking the bear. You couldn't just be smile and enjoy the ride. You had to just be throw that out there. And of course, the Carolina Panthers then all of a sudden now are they go into hostile environments. They win football games outright. So
can I ask you a question? You just said I was a kid in the playground, that I was poking the bear. Did you have bears on the playground when you were growing up? Where did you grow up, Colin?
I was the bear on the playground. I was the bear.
Oh, got it. Okay. Well, listen, I didn't hate the pick last week. You had the Seahawks over Carolina. Now the Seahawks looking a little troublesome if they're going to make the playoffs at this point. So a little dicey for Seahawks fans. But We're not here to talk about the Seahawks unless you're going to pick them again. But
no,
we shall see. So, Colin, this takes you to 9-3-1 in the season. It is still very impressive. I'm going back to rooting against you. I promise I will no longer root for you to succeed in life or on this podcast. But yeah, so listen, you tell us, where does your losing bet take you this week?
Yeah. Well, the bet takes us down to Tampa Bay, where they will have the Cincinnati Bengals coming into town. But I'm going to actually stay with those road Bengals, -3.5 against Tom Brady Buccaneers, who got beat like a Grand Canyon mule this week, 35-7 against the San Francisco 49ers. Again, the Niners are very good, but the Bengals actually might be the hottest team in football. 5 in a row, just playing complimentary football. They get their star, Jamar Chase, back. He goes off this past weekend. So that team looks like it is going to do some damage in the playoffs, and the Bucs are really looking like they're kind of running out of gas. Tom Brady's frustrated. But yes, minus 3.5. Give me Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and the Cincinnati Bengals against Tom Brady and the Bucs this weekend.
Well, Better Edge social betting platform, Colin. You found that 3.5 line still up there?
Yeah, he was up there today. Yep.
What's the current line right now? Is it 3.5? Like the actual line?
I believe so. Yeah. I Better Edge is my site, man. Sometimes I don't even go out and look at elsewhere.
I think the actual line's 3.5. So listen, no one can accuse you of cheating, like some people might be doing, because you're using these Better Edge lines, which I don't know if you think Colin's cheating. You guys can cheat too. Use our promo code Conduct. Get $20 for free by signing up. But Colin, I'm sitting here. You're just picking the actual line. You like the Bengals minus 3.5. And I'll give you one thing further, right? Speaking about some sports, so we always get a tie in the sports here. Lamar Jackson, right, has a big injury right now, right?
Yep.
I took a bet, legal betting last week. I took Cincinnati plus 125 to win the AFC North. But now we're talking sports law. Lamar Jackson looked at that Deshaun Watson $230 million guaranteed contract, and he said, you know what? I'm good. If I can't get that Deshaun Watson money, I'm going to play out the season. And look what happened. Now Jackson's hurt. If Huntley and Ravens can win without him, as they did last week in Seattle, I'm not sure that helps Lamar's leverage over here. But a little bit of sports law. It's sprinkled in everywhere we look.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, it was a real shame because Lamar Jackson's actually been a stand-up figure in the community in Baltimore and stuff. It's like a guy you want to root for, that big contract. Deshaun Watson, not so much. He's been very mediocre since his return. That's what they lost to the Bengals this week, and he was very pedestrian in his return. But he hasn't played football in 2 years, so you kind of figure that happens.
Mediocre is putting it lightly. He has been atrocious. But obviously, you don't play football for that long, is what it is. Colin, speaking about people that are not going to be playing football, at least for the remainder of this season, how's your fantasy team doing?
Yeah, and that'll be back to you guys in the studio. We're no comment on that.
Well, in the Conduct Detrimental Fantasy League, yours truly is the number 2 seed. Conlon, not so great, not making the playoffs, but winner take all. We'll keep you posted on that. Congrats to Evan Mattel, Matt Haig, and John Azzato, our final 4 in the fantasy football playoffs. Conlon, listen, I was rooting for you, but your prowess is only on the sports betting field. But excellent job as always. 9-3-1. Jokes aside, is fantastic for the year. I know Better Edge is super happy about it, and as are we. Colin, keep doing your thing, and see you next time for some more picks. Colin, anything to add before we get you out of here?
No, I'm gonna head out though, buddy. Yeah, let's get back on the right side of the win column this week.
Sounds good, and that'll do it for another episode of Conduct Detrimental. And as always, we'll see you next time for more sports and law on another episode of Conduct Detrimental.